Chapter 41. The Story of Rowsby Woof and the Fairy Wog Dog. Now came the dog days, day after day of hot, still summer, when, for hours at a time, light seemed the only thing that moved. The sky, the sun, clouds, and breeze, awake above the drowsing downs. The beech leaves grew darker on their boughs, and fresh grass grew where the old had been nibbled close. The warren was thriving, at last, and Hazel could sit basking on the bank and counting his blessings. Above and underground, the rabbits fell naturally into a quiet, undisturbed rhythm of feeding, digging, and sleeping. Several fresh runs and burrows were made, and the does, who had never dug in their lives before, enjoyed the work. Both Hyzenthley and Thethuthenang told Hazel that they had had no idea of how much of their frustration and unhappiness in Ephrathah had simply been due to not being allowed to dig. Even Clover and Haystack found that they could manage pretty well, and boasted that they were going to bear the warren's first litters in burrows that they had dug themselves. Blackavar and Holly became close friends. They talked a great deal about their different ideas for scouting and tracking, and even went on some patrols together, more for their own satisfaction than because there was any real need. And one early morning they persuaded Silver to come with them, and they travelled over a mile to the outskirts of the village of Kingsclear, returning with a tale of mischief and feasting in a cottage garden. Blackavar's hearing had weakened since the mutilation of his ears, but Holly had found that his powers of noticing and drawing conclusions from anything unusual was almost uncanny, and that he seemed to be able to become invisible at will. 16 bucks and 10 does made for a happy enough society in a warren. There was some bickering here and there, but nothing serious, and as Bluebell said, any rabbit who felt discontented could always go back to Ephrathah, and the thought of all they had faced together was enough to take the sting out of anything that might have made for a real quarrel. The contentment of the does spread to everyone else, until one evening Hazel remarked that he felt as a perfect fraud as Chief Rabbit, for there were no problems and hardly a dispute to be settled. "Well, have you thought about the winter yet?" asked Holly. And 4 or 5 of the bucks, with Clover, Hyzenthley, and Vilthril, were feeding along the sunny west side of the beech trees about an hour before sunset. It was still hot, and the down was so quiet that they could hear horses tearing grass from a paddock in Cannon Heath Farm, more than a half-mile away. It certainly did not seem a time to be thinking of winter. "Well, it's going to be colder up here than any of us have been used to, I imagine," said Hazel. "But the soil is so light, and the roots break it up so much, that we could dig a lot deeper before the cold weather comes. I think we ought to be able to get below the frost line. As for the wind, well, we can block in some of the holes and sleep warmer that way. Grass will be poor in winter, I know, but anyone who needs a change can always go out with Holly here and try his luck at stealing some green stuff or roots. It's the time of year to be careful of Elil, though. Myself, I shall be quite happy to sleep underground, to play bobstones, and to hear a few stories from time to time." "Well, what about a story now?" said Bluebell. "Come on, Dandelion. How about How I Nearly Missed the Boat? What about that one?" "Oh, you mean Woundwort Dismayed," said Dandelion. "No, that's Bigwig's story. I couldn't presume to tell it. But it makes a change to be thinking about winter on an evening like this. It reminds me of a story I've listened to, but never actually told myself. So some of you may know it, and perhaps some won't. It's the story of Rowsby Woof and the Fairy Wog Dog." "Off you go," said Fiver, "and lay it on thick." One evening, when Frith was sinking huge and red in a green sky, El-ahrairah and Rabscuttle limped trembling through the frozen grass, picking a bite here and there to carry them on for another long night underground. The grass was as brittle and tasteless as hay, and although they were hungry, they had been making the best of the miserable stuff for so long that it was as much as they could do to choke it down. At last, Rabscuttle suggested that they might take a risk for once, and slip across the fields to the edge of the village, where there was a big vegetable garden. And this particular garden was bigger than any of the others around, and the man who worked it lived in a house at one end, and he used to dig or cut great quantities of vegetables and put them in his redudu and drive them away. He had put wire all around the garden to keep the rabbits out, but all the same, El-ahrairah could usually find a way in if he wanted to, but it was dangerous, because the man carried a gun, and often would shoot jays and pigeons and hang them up on display. But it's not only the gun we'd be risking either, said El-ahrairah, thinking it over. We'll have to keep an eye out for that confounded Rousby-woof as well. Now, Rousby-woof was the man's dog, and he was the most objectionable, malicious, disgusting brute that ever licked a man's hand. He was a big, woolly sort of animal, with hair growing all over his eyes, and the man kept him to guard the vegetable garden, especially at night. Rousby-woof, of course, did not eat vegetables himself, and anyone might have thought that he would have been ready to let a few hungry animals steal a lettuce or a carrot now and then, and no questions asked. But not a chance. Rousby-woof used to run loose from evening till dawn the next day, and was not content with keeping men and boys out of the garden. He would go after any animal he found there, rats, rabbits, hares, mice, even moles, and he would kill them if he had the chance. And the moment he smelled anything in the nature of an intruder, he would start barking and kicking up quite a noise, although very often it was only this foolish noise which warned a rabbit and enabled him to get away in time. Rousby-woof was reckoned to be a tremendous ratter, and his master had boasted about this skill so often and showed him off so much that he had become revoltingly conceited. He believed himself to be the finest rat hunter in the world. He ate a lot of raw meat, but not in the evening, because then he was left hungry at night to keep him more active, and this made him rather easy to smell. But even so, he made the garden a dangerous place. Well, let's chance Rousby-woof for once, said Rabscuttle. I reckon you and I ought to be able to give him the slip if we have to. So El-ahrairah and Rabscuttle made their way across the fields to the outskirts of the garden. When they got there, the first thing they saw was the man himself, with a white stick burning away in his mouth, cutting row after row of frosted cabbage. Rousby-woof was with him, wagging his tail and jumping about in a ridiculous manner. And after a time, the man piled as many of the cabbages as he could into a wheelbarrow and pushed them to the house. He came back several times, and when he had taken all the cabbages to the door of his house, he began to carry them inside. "Oh, what's he doing that for?" asked Rabscuttle. "I suppose he wants to thaw the frost out of them tonight," replied El-ahrairah, "before he takes them away in his redudu tomorrow." "They'd be so much better to eat with the frost out of them, wouldn't they?" said Rabscuttle. "I wish we could get at them while they're in there. Still, never mind. Now's our chance. Let's see what we can do at this end of the garden while he's busy down there." But hardly had they crossed the top of the garden and got among the cabbages than Rousby-woof had smelled them on the wind, and down he came, barking and yelping, and they were lucky to escape in time. "Dirty little beasts!" shouted Rousby-woof. How dare you come snouting around here? Get out, out! What a contemptible brute," said El-ahrairah, as they scurried back to their warren, with nothing to show for their trouble. "He's really annoyed me. I don't know yet how I'm going to do it, but by frith and inlay, before this frost thaws, we will eat cabbages inside that house, and make that confounded Rousby-woof look a fool." "That's saying too much, master," said Rabscuttle. "It's a pity to throw your life away for a cabbage, after all we've been through together." "Well, I'll just watch for my chance," said El-ahrairah. "I shall just be watching for my chance, that's all." And the following afternoon, Rabscuttle was out and about, nosing along the top of the bank beside the lane, when a redudu passed by. It had doors at the back, and these doors had somehow come open and were swinging around as the redudu went along. And there were some things wrapped up in bags, like the ones men sometimes leave about their fields, and as the redudu passed Rabscuttle, one of these bags fell out onto the lane, and when the redudu had passed, Rabscuttle, who hoped the bag might have something to eat inside, slipped down to the lane to have a sniff. But he was disappointed to find that all it contained was some sort of meat, and later he told El-ahrairah about his disappointment. "Meat?" said El-ahrairah. "Is it still there?" "Oh, how should I know? said Rabscuttle. "It's beastly stuff." "Oh, come with me," said El-ahrairah, "and quickly too." And when they got to the lane, the meat was still there, and El-ahrairah dragged the bag into the ditch, and they buried it. "But what good will this be to us, master?" said Rabscuttle. "I don't know yet," said El-ahrairah, "but some good it will surely be if the rats don't get to it first. Come home now, though. It's getting dark." And as they were going home, they came upon an old black wheel covering thrown away from a hurdudu lying in the ditch. And if you've ever seen one of these things, you'll know that they're something like a huge fungus. They're smooth and strong, but soft and yielding too. They smell very unpleasant and are no good to eat. "Come on," said El-ahrairah immediately. "Let's chew off a piece of this. I need it." Rabscuttle wondered whether his master were going mad, but he did as he was told, and the stuff had grown fairly rotten, and before long they were able to chew off a lump about the size of a rabbit's head. It tasted dreadful, but El-ahrairah dragged it carefully back to the warren. He spent a lot of time that night nibbling at it, and after morning silflay the next day, he continued. About in a frith, he woke Rabscuttle, made him come outside, and put the lump in front of him. "What does that look like?" he said. "Never mind the smell. What does it look like?" And Rabscuttle stared at it. "Well, it looks like a dog's black nose, master," he answered, "except that it's dry." "Splendid," said El-ahrairah, and he went to sleep. It was still frosty, very clear and cold that night, with half a moon in the sky, but at Fu Inlay, when all the other rabbits were keeping warm underground, El-ahrairah told Rabscuttle to come with him. El-ahrairah carried the black nose himself, and on the way he pushed it into every nasty thing he could find. He found well, never mind, said Hazel. Just get on with the story. Okay. In the end, continued Dandelion, Rabscuttle kept well away from him, but El-ahrairah held his breath and still carried the nose somehow, until they got to the place where they had buried the meat. Dig it up, said El-ahrairah. Come on. They dug it up, and the paper came off. The meat was all bits joined together in a kind of trail, and poor Rabscuttle was told to drag it along to the bottom of the vegetable garden. It was hard work, and he was glad when he was able to drop it. Now, said El-ahrairah, we'll go around to the front. When they got to the front, they could tell that the man had left. For one thing, the house was all dark, but besides, they could smell he had passed through the gate a little while before. The front of the house had a flower garden, and this was separated from the back and the vegetable garden by a high close-boarded fence that ran right across and ended at a big clump of laurels. Just the other side of the fence was the back door that led into the man's kitchen. El-ahrairah and Rabscuttle went quietly through the front garden and peeked through a crack in the fence. Rouseabout was sitting on the gravel path, wide awake and shivering in the cold. He was so near that they could see his eyes blink in the moonlight. The kitchen door was shut, but nearby, along the wall, there was a hole above the drain where a brick had been left out. The kitchen floor was made of brick, and the man would wash it with a rough broom and simply sweep the water out through this hole. Although now the hole was plugged up with an old cloth to keep out the cold weather. And after a little while, El-ahrairah said in a low voice, Rouseabout, oh Rouseabout. Rouseabout sat up and looked about him, bristling. Who's there? He said. Who are you? Oh Rouseabout, said El-ahrairah, crouching on the other side of the fence. Most fortunate, most blessed Rouseabout, your reward is at hand. I bring you the best news in the world. What? Said Rouseabout. Who's that? None of your tricks now. Tricks? Rouseabout, said El-ahrairah. Ah, I see you do not know me. But how should you? Listen, my faithful, skillful hound. I am the fairy Wogdog, messenger of the great dog spirit to the east, Queen Dripslobber. Far, far in the east her palace lies. Ah, Rouseabout, if only you could see her mighty state, the wonders of her kingdom. The rotting flesh that lies far and wide upon the sands. The manure, Rouseabout, the open sewers. Oh, how you would jump for joy and run around, nosing everywhere.